welcome to episode 4 of the WolfCast, a MalWerewolf podcast. Today is Saturday, July 10th, 2021. My name is Alan, aka CorgiSec, and joining me as always is Jason, aka Distract Icon. And we are the team at MalWerewolf here to talk all things cybersecurity. On this week, episode title, Quest for Knowledge, we are going to talk about education and certification. So look forward to that. As always, thank you to everybody who has been listening thus far. So, let's get on with the show. How you doing, Jason?
Doing all right, man. How are you doing?
Very hot. Japan is really hot, even though it's raining. It's confusing. I don't like it.
Is it just raining fire? Is that what it's doing?
Honestly, that would probably be preferable. Because now it's just humid.
You're just swimming through the air?
Yeah, pretty much. But, yeah, off to a good start. So, already off topic.
Yeah.
But hey, that's kind of what we do here, right?
Yeah, well, we'll see how our numbers decide about that, but please like us.
Hey, man, we're real.
We're really good at wasting people's time. That's what we are. But
I mean, we're in the right industry. I feel like kind of that's the norm, so,
All right.
All right. Well, so I suppose at this point we have a lot to cover, so might as well get into it. So as usual, we can go ahead and start off with our news section, and you could say a few things happened this week that are kind of important, maybe, possibly. So let's get into it. Yeah, nothing happened. It was just a very quiet week.
Nothing happened. Punch was served.
So there's really the only kind of one place to start, and it's a story from Dark Reading about the Kaseya ransomware breach. And title of this particular story, Cyber Attack on Kaseya nets more than 1,000 victims, 70 million ransom demand. So, yeah, for those of you not familiar, and I don't know how you would be if you were literally on the internet this past week, Kaseya VSA, their virtual server administration software, essentially was compromised and used to attack a number of MSPs who are using Kaseya with the REvil ransomware. So, this was not super good. I mean, ransomware attacks are not new, but going kind of straight after the managed service providers was obviously you kind of know this is going to keep happening because they're a high value target, but this particular one seems like it was pretty widespread. Over 1,000 victims wanting a $70 million ransom. So
who becomes responsible for that? I mean, like you. That's probably a stupid question, but like I'm curious as to just how many people would then in turn, if they ended up having to pay the ransom, do they have means to be able to go after Kaseya? Like how I don't really know the legalities behind that.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of those things you'd probably need to talk to a lawyer. But yeah. I would imagine Kaseya probably has something in their EULA that's like, oh, we're not responsible for, whatever happens with our software on your network.
I hope so.
Or something like that. But at the same time, does that necessarily hold up in a court of law? Because I'm sure the MSPs are probably not going to be looking to, they don't want to pay either. So unless you have a good insurance policy that's going to front the cash for this, assuming they actually pay. So, yeah, I don't know. There's going to be a messy one because usually there's a lot of victims in this one. So I think even just the logistics around that are going to be pretty interesting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the other thing is I still saw a whole bunch of, what do we call them? Keyboard commandos? I don't know. Folks already giving the shoulda, woulda, couldas about the Kaseya stuff, I'm like, this isn't helping anything, people.
Yeah, but this also happens with like every attack. Everyone's an expert when they're not the one directly dealing with it.
Yeah,
but
I don't know. Maybe we can talk to that one fellow who doesn't believe in hiring anyone who's ever been part of a compromise. I'm sure he's got something good to say about it.
I mean, give it a few months, and that dude is literally not going to have anybody who's hireable if he keeps that policy the way this is going.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, this was clearly a well-coordinated attack. I mean, there's talks that this was a 0-day was used, and essentially a couple of other vulnerabilities as well. The attack itself is very well coordinated. Took only a couple of hours from the time they actually started the attack to the point where they had ransomware deployed, in part due to the fact that Kaseya's software is used for automation and doing exactly these types of things. So it was a very convenient way for them to spread their malware through to all the victims. So yeah, this is pretty messy. We're going to be reading about this for a while, I imagine.
Yeah, I'd be super interested to know if there was any like dark web selling of any of the 0 days utilized or anything developed prior to the stuff happening, or if this was really just like a consolidated effort.
Yeah, I thought I'd read somewhere that they actually bought the 0 day off of somebody, but I don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
But I was reading a decent amount about this, and I thought there was some mention of that. But it wouldn't really surprise me, because that's how a lot of this stuff happens. It's people selling access, selling CVEs, and then these bigger groups picking them up because they got the money to fund it, and then making them available to whoever their affiliates are, whoever.
Yeah, well, that's where stuff like TI starts actually becoming important, where folks are spending time looking for people selling not necessarily the CVEs, but just finding out what of the landscape is being attacked. And that's what I'm afraid is not really where most TI things are headed towards, although like I find that to be way more important than just the, hey, here's some indicators.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think there's some TI shops that do advertise stuff like that. I think FireEye does it. I know Recorded Future says they do it. I don't know how reliable.
There's a lot of confidence in that.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who claim a lot of different things because there's a lot of different TI shops. So how reliable they are, I can't speak to all of them. I mean, personally, I used FireEye, and in their case, it's kind of easy to see why they would be reliable because of the amount of IR engagements they end up having that's feeding back into that, and they have the resources to kind of do that on a large scale. So
yeah.
But yeah, I agree. I mean, this is one of those things. If somebody actually was a part of that and was able to get access and say like, hey, somebody's saying some selling Kaseya vulnerability, probably would have helped. But there's. I feel like that's also a cat and mouse game, because these groups could also be like, well, I only offer this to my trusted, close-knit circle of people that I know are, quote-unquote good.
Yeah. Plus the fact of the matter is they could just say something like they could just be having those very broad, generic terms of like, oh, a management software, not actually specify the name of the company or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. But still something I think worth exploring, because I think this is gonna keep happening, especially now with the recent trend in both supply chain and managed service providers. Like I feel like this is gonna this is not gonna be the last of these types of attacks. They're just gonna keep kind of cycling through these different companies that basically provide these types of services and keep going after them because they're big targets. And well, when you compromise a lot of people, some of them are going to pay, even if all of them don't.
Yeah, just need one in most cases, actually.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, a lot to read on those for those who are interested. Actually, one thing I did want to call out: Huntress Labs actually had some pretty good analysis on this, and they went pretty in depth in the details on the attack and everything. So I'll try to include a link to that.
Yeah, I think I think I saw that. Was it a few days ago?
Yeah. I took a look at it, and it's a pretty in-depth kind of analysis as far as this particular attack goes. So a good read for those interested in knowing the details and the timelines of how this happened and everything. So next, can move on to a story from SecureList and reported obviously in pretty much everywhere else. And it's just taking a quick look at CV 2021-1675 and 2021-34-527, aka the print nightmare. So yeah, this was not to be outdone. Microsoft had a headline, and this one was pretty big as well, and a privilege escalation vulnerabilities in the print spooler service. Two of them essentially. So. That was another thing that happened, and one that's probably affecting a lot more people. Because I'm pretty sure even if you're not running Kaseya, you're probably running the print spooler service.
There's going to be a very, very long fallout on this one, just like Eternal Blue, just like all those things.
Yeah, and from the stuff I've been reading, even the hot fixes and the patches that Microsoft has released so far, technically there's workarounds, so they're not exactly solving the issue.
Probably just trying to contain for the moment, and while they develop. I mean,
yeah,
that's what I was assuming.
Yeah, but this also definitely this feels like one of those things that. First of all, until there's an effective patch, how many people are going to get compromised that then don't even know it and then patch after the fact?
Sure.
Or people who just, for whatever reason, aren't going to patch in a timely manner. Because, we're still finding people running SMB 1.0.
Yeah. Well, you know what people are saying about Blizzard and everything. So Microsoft's probably the same thing. They're just a small indie company or whatever.
Yeah, well, they got a few people here and there, but
I wish all of those folks could go and work any of the jobs for. We'll give it 2 hours and see if they still have that opinion. I'd lose my mind trying to figure out how to fix something like this.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing you can say about Microsoft, at least, is they had a lot of practice. So I feel like they had this type of, playbook down pretty much.
Yeah.
Still, I don't envy people having to work on this because this is pretty big. But there's a number of places that did a pretty decent write-up. Like I said, SecureList is one of them, but I'm sure there's plenty of others. I did see the Unit 42 in Palo Alto did a write-up on it as well. So, good one probably to be aware of because you're probably going to be seeing this around for quite a while as well. Next, I wanted to talk about... This is the funniest headline of the week. And this is from the Register, and the headline reads, "Ransomware hit law firm gets court order asking crooks not to publish the data they stole." I don't really even think I have to go into any more details than that. But a barrister's chambers hit by a ransomware attack has responded by getting a court order demanding the criminals do not share stolen data. I almost, I don't even know what to say to this. This is just great.
Me fail English. That's impossible.
It's just good. Even the byline for the article, it just says, "Good luck with that."
Yeah. The very first picture should have been Ralph Wiggum. That's exactly what we'd expect from someone like good old Ralph.
It's just I can just like imagine a bunch of lawyers sitting around just thinking like, well, what do we do? I get it. We'll get a court order telling him not to release it. And them thinking this is an amazing idea.
Yeah, person. Why doesn't everyone else just do this? God, this is easy.
Yeah, I'm sure the people in Russia, deploying the ransomware, sitting there thinking like, oh no, what are we gonna do now? They got a court order. we should really. I guess we just give up and go home. That's I don't really need to say anymore. I just needed to include that.
Hey, yeah, it was good. At least they can feel like they've done something, and
yeah.
Maybe tell other people that the data that was stolen, like, oh hey, we pulled out a court order, and just hope that those people don't go like, well, what does that do?
Yeah. And last story of the week. This is another one of those stories that's like I'm just including because I've seen this reported a few times, and it's a story from Softpedia News. Latest ransomware developed to avoid Russian systems. And the reason I put this in there is just because I've seen this several times now over the past several weeks / months, and every time I read this, my initial thought is, why is this in the news?
Security's still new, right? That's one of the things that we've seen it. We know folks who've been in the field, the industry, before it was born, basically. But all the folks that we know of who's dealt with malware are familiar. This just as you're saying, this stuff isn't new. Folks specifically targeting certain things, but this has also been used for obfuscation. What's a good means of saying that?
Like misdirection?
Yeah, misdirection.
Yeah.
Like this type of stuff has been used a lot for things like misdirect. I mean,
pin things on potentially Russian actors by
Well, anybody like China. I mean, the U.S. themselves. Just everybody has had malware that has tried to point to some other means, and the biggest problem is that we always take those small little nuggets of data, base an assumption, and then start trying to associate whatever this malware is to that group instead of letting the facts, letting the actual behaviors speak for themselves. And one of those, one of those types of problems that can come about is just stuff. I'm pretty sure we've talked about it before, where you start creating this bias in your mind of knowing who you're going after, what you're targeting, and all of this stuff, and it's bad. It's bad as an analyst to try and work towards it. You give good. You can certainly take that information, pivot off into, okay, well, we know that these specific groups do these specific techniques, let's look for it. But if you establish it as a certainty right off the bat just because of X, you're bound to eventually screw yourself over. I mean, it'll just be bad.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason attribution is such an important part of threat intel and doing this stuff, and why places like FireEye don't, they very much do not, that's attribute something to a specific group until they're about as sure as they can possibly be that it is them, for that reason exactly, because there is misdirection and attempts to masquerade as a different actor, etc., as a way to shift attention away from the people who actually carried out the attack. So exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, like with anything, don't take any one piece of evidence as fact and assume, like, that's just, like you said, that's just a bad way to approach analysis in general. But Yeah, in this particular case, like it's this whole idea of avoiding Russian systems has been around since like the first exploit kits, basically.
Sure.
Because most of them were operating out of Russia, so don't bite the hand that feeds you type of situation.
Right.
Obviously, like they're not going to extradite you unless you give them a reason to. So. Yep. Generally, as long as you don't give them a reason, you're probably fine to continue operating. So, of course, this is going to keep happening.
And to add on to that, the things that we would see is we would see people purchase the software that is being utilized for either exploitation or whatever, and we as a community would immediately point to like, oh, this group has to be blah, even though the truth is the people who purchased the software has nothing to do with it. They just bought it off the dark web, and they're doing their own thing somewhere else. So
Yep.
It's just all really having to understand the different layers and the insane amount of depth a lot of this stuff tends to go for good TI platforms and team members.
I mean, to me, that's kind of the fun part of the TI is figuring out that this isn't just one dude in Russia in a basement with a computer. Like that they, these people operate as companies do. Like they have the same thing, like their same level of operations, and they have developers, they have essentially people who do even things like advertising, they have people who do negotiating. Like I personally find, like, to me, that's the part that's interesting about TI, is understanding how that stuff works and the economy behind it, which is one of the reasons I actually miss exploit kits, because it was very interesting to just track the different groups and how they're competing with each other and what they were doing to differentiate from each other and all that stuff. Like, I found that stuff really, really fun to deal with as an analyst. Cool. All right, so as always, we'll include the links to all of these stories, and I will make sure to include the link to the Huntress Labs report as well, as that is a pretty good read. So next we should move into our main topic for this week. And as I mentioned in the introduction, that's going to be this week we're talking about education and certification. These are topics that I think there's going to forever be debates about. So we just wanted to go ahead and talk a little bit and give our 2 cents, considering we both have education in the specifically in the information security field, and obviously we have both gone through several certifications, etc. So yeah, why not talk about that as well?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know if you consider my stuff education. You certainly have got good stuff, but...
Well, that's, I guess, what we're talking about.
Sure. That sounds good. The one thing with the education and certifications, one of the biggest problems that you run into is really that HR hurdle, and that's one of the biggest reasons we want to talk about it, is trying to get the most out of what you're paying for. Fact of the matter is there's still going to be a heck of a lot of companies out there that expect you to have, whether it's a BA, whether it's an AA, whether it's certain SAN certifications, whether it's just a Security Plus, or whether it's just showing that you've taken the initiative and moved towards certifications. There's a lot of folks that just expect at least something like that out of you. Now, there are quite a few that don't. And by quite a few, I mean out of... I haven't been secretive about how many different applications and stuff I've been putting in over the course of the past X amount of months, but I want to say out of all the ones that I've applied to, there was at least 10% that absolutely required both certification and schooling. I would say there was probably around the 20% mark that were requiring at least either a Security Plus or CISSP. And the rest of it said, now I don't have any confirmation of it, but there was quite a few of them that didn't really have any requirements. They just said experience can make up for any of the preferred items, and preferred items were still a BA or higher, and or in most cases it was looking for SANS courses. It wasn't looking for Security Pluses. I'm not really looking. I wasn't really looking for anything on the entry level or level 1 positions like we're generally targeting, though. But I do know, at least from the experience of looking for around the level 2, level 3s, level 3 positions, or any of the just standard engineering, that's what it's looking like right now.
Yep. And that's kind of the caveat I wanted to mention, is obviously the stuff we're looking at is going to be more senior level positions, but that's kind of why that substitute for experience is possible. But obviously if you're entry level or junior, you don't have the experience to substitute, so probably those requirements are going to be a bit more rigid on the certification front, because that's really the only, it's not the only way, but it's one of the only ways from the HR perspective that they can say, like, oh, well, you can prove you actually have the knowledge. Whether that's good or not is a debate, but unfortunately it is kind of the reality of it.
Yeah, for sure. But
yeah,
well, let's kind of get into talking about what from a brand new person's perspective, trying to get in. Let's say they are. Let's say that they have just come out of college. So we'll start with the assumption that maybe this person just got a BA or an AA in something related to information security or IT. What are the things that they would be asking the employer? What do you have?
Yeah. One of the things definitely that I think a lot of people maybe don't consider is when talking to a prospective employer, you talk about things like salary, things like benefits, things like hours, work-life balance, etc. Obviously, all those things are important, but do kind of make sure that you are asking whether there's some continued education support. Obviously, if you just finish school, maybe they're not gonna. It's not going to help you if they offer some discount on tuition, but maybe they are willing to pay for a part of it, or give you some of that basically, so you can kind of get some of those loans repaid if you actually have loans, which a lot of us do. God knows I do. But also, ask them about things like, do you pay for certifications? And please make sure you have them be clear. If they say, yes, we do, follow that question up with, what certifications are you paying for? What is the budget? Because that can be a bit of a trick question, because they could be like, yeah, we pay for certification. You assume, oh, okay, they're willing to pay for SANS courses. And then you get there like, no, we're willing to pay for Security Plus and nothing higher. So if you just want a Security Plus, that's probably fine. But if you're somebody who thinks, hey, I want my employer to pay for, SANS training, make sure you clarify that that's what they're referring to, especially with the rising cost of those certifications. There's a lot of places that even used to pay for that now don't. Yeah. So just be specific. Like, do actually ask about those types of details.
And one of the other things that when it comes to that, and just because it's on the education side of things, is to also find out if there's continued education within the team, like not necessarily just from a school type of scenario or a certification type of scenario, but is there anything that the employer is doing in order to invest within the growth of the employee. Because the fact of the matter is that if they expect you to come in and do everything yourself, that's how it's been for quite some time, and we're kind of starting to see that works for some folks, but there's also really good folks out there that doesn't necessarily match up to. I mean, we see a lot of folks on Twitter talking about stuff where like they want to put their work time in work. They don't want to have to go home and think about dealing with things such as dealing with certification tests or dealing with any extracurricular education type of stuff. They want to be able to have the time to do things, have a life and not have their life be work. So in those cases, we have to figure out how do we do all of this? How do we give those options? And some of the stuff that we've ran into is running into the problem of one or the other instead of both. So that's the other thing to think about, is when you are talking to those people and having the conversations with a potential employer, ask them what kind of internal growth is there from the perspective of knowledge, not just internal growth as far as, oh, what position can I get to at XYZ? No, talk about how their platform is for learning and being able to identify your own growth from that.
Right. And to give some kind of, I guess, a little bit more detail for that, what that can be, it doesn't, it's not limited to just certification. But to me, an ideal scenario is, something that we both had in our previous employer is, if, for example, it's a slow day or something, you had the ability to just spend a couple of hours a day studying for a certification or something like that. And it was not only something that was like allowed, but it was very actively encouraged. Because there's a lot of benefits to that. It gives you a break from your day-to-day. It lets you focus on something else. So then when you go back to doing your normal ticketing or whatever you're doing, you kind of had a bit of a break. So now you come back with a bit more of a refreshed attitude, essentially. So that was something that definitely served me and I made use out of. But this can take a lot of different forms. It can even be something just as simple as like, hey, we have our internal group, like within the team, we created, like a lunch and learn type of situation, or we'll just, on our weekly meeting, somebody will present something for 5 or 10 minutes and we'll just talk about it. Like, that's not a super formal thing. It's not a massive time investment, but it's something that does allow people to, present new information and learn, even if it's just something as simple as like, kind of what we just did, where it's like, hey, I read a cool story, let's just talk about it. And it can take that's just a couple of examples, but there's a million different ways you can do this, as long as it's something that you get a benefit out of and it continues to support your ability to learn and grow. That doesn't necessarily, like Jason mentioned, require you to invest all of your free time in order to do it.
Yep. And CTFs were super duper fun for us to all kind of work together on. Another piece of means of being able to get some education internally. But the other thing was just conferences. Some places say, yeah, you can go to them, but you have to take PTO. You have to take blah in order to go to that activity. And that'll tell you pretty quickly whether or not those conversations have taken place with their HR, or whether their management understands how useful conferences can be. And really, the point of it is on both sides, right? Like, if the manager doesn't understand what the value is of those meetups, maybe it's because the people who are going to those meetups aren't providing any of the information back, and vice versa. Right. So from that perspective, if you are going to something and you're getting something out of it, provide it back to the team to prove and show what that knowledge is, and make sure it's shared. And then that becomes a hell of a lot easier to sell to HR, if you're having to try and explain like, oh, this is the reason why we are letting these people do this while still being paid by the company. We believe that this is part of our travel budget, as an example. So we want them to go to this meetup on this day or this conference on this day. But there's always that potential for either management or upper management or human resources to say like, no, we shouldn't be doing this. They have to use their PTO. But the fact of the matter is I think out of all the folks that I know, I would say a good 80% of them have in some way, shape, or form come from conversations with people from conferences, people from meetups, and those same people have been contacts who have given me great indicators of compromise, general behaviors, which I've in turn found things for. So it's good to explain to the employee who's coming in that like, hey, we want you to grow. We actively will fund you to go to places. Now, it's not something where you want to say, yeah, you can do something every week. But if you are in a position to be able to provide a means for someone to do something once every few months or every 6 months, whatever can be allowed for the work schedule, it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, especially from, like you mentioned, the networking perspective, like that's kind of really, at least in my experience from the 5 or so DEF CONs we went to, it's like you don't have to focus on things like the talks. You can just focus on meeting people and creating those connections that will then pay dividends later. So there's a lot of benefits to it, definitely. Obviously, it's been less of a thing given our current situation and no travel and things like that. But this is going to, as things get back to normal, this is going to start becoming a bit more relevant again. And and to me, all of these types of things, answers to these questions, it's a way to evaluate your prospective employer and get a better understanding of how do they think about security, how does the person managing that thing think about security, how does the company as a whole think about it. And it's a two-way street. Like, these are the type of questions that let you decide whether you actually want to work there or not. At least to me, that's how how I look at it, because it's depending how they answer questions like this tells me about the general philosophy they have when it comes to things like security.
Yeah, and also the management, right? We've talked about it many, many times, but there's a lot of folks that we still see who get thrown into management of security from a completely different other group, and because of that, they're taking their perspective of how they've been successful in some other group, and they're trying to apply it to a field that is basically a spy versus spy type of environment, and they tend to not be the same. And because of that, you will find yourself hindering your team by trying to apply the same rules. And this is coming from folks who have worked at a construction company for a better part of their careers, and seeing that one-for-one of not necessarily direct security management, but just overall management of the company in comparison to what most security teams and how they're managed. It was, I wouldn't say a wake-up call, but it was definitely something that our HR had to try and figure out how to deal with. Just like it wasn't something where we were trying to demand things, but it's certainly a different perspective when we're going like, no, we can't. You can't necessarily treat security or even IT from that perspective the same as you treat the rest of these other type of groups, like a lot of these different things. And this goes for pretty much all the different positions and types of positions that are out there. they have to be a little bit more flexible and fluid to what that team might represent and what type of knowledge they need to get to and how in comparison to what those expectations should be.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's not uncommon, like you said, for people to come from unrelated positions, but in those cases, those people need to rely on the people on their team who have been in that industry for a long time and essentially use them as, basically get their support and kind of work together to basically be effective security manager. Because it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't translate. It very much doesn't. Like, it's its own industry for a reason, and it's its own kind of beast for a reason. And like you said, you have to have that flexibility. And to me, in my opinion, the best managers I ever worked with, they might not necessarily have been security managers always, but they were good managers in the sense that they knew what they knew what they didn't know, and they relied on the people on their team with that knowledge to basically tell them and educate them and teach them about what works and what doesn't, why and why not. And then their job as a manager just more became about, okay, I'm just gonna support these people and make sure they can do their job in the most effective way that I can.
Yeah.
And generally they have been the ones that I think have been the most effective,
at least the most memorable.
Yeah.
On the positive side of things, I should say.
Yep. All right. So let's get into the education-specific stuff. So that this is, talking about things like degrees, do you need it, do you not, etc. As we kind of mentioned before, all of this at the end kind of comes down to, more often than not, is going to be an HR checkbox. That's not to say you're not going to get anything out of it, but it's, there's so many different schools, there's so many different types of programs. To say they're all effective or not is, you can't really paint them with a broad brush. But at the end of the day, the biggest benefit you're getting is, like we said, is that HR person who says this needs to be a checkbox I can check off, and either you have it or you don't. So, yeah, whether that's actually worth it or not, I think partially is going to depend on where you live. If you live in the States and that puts you in debt, it's more of a conversation than if you live somewhere where you're not having to pay for it, for example.
Right. The other, to start it off again and explain at least where we are at. I got a BA through Western Governors University. I have an AA through University of Phoenix. University of Phoenix was literally 5 times more expensive than getting my BA through Western Governors. So I felt pretty good when I ended up getting a BA for only like, what was it, 12 grand or something, 10 grand. But I don't even want to get into how much debt you're in, buddy, but
I don't either. I'm just waiting for Biden to forgive about 50 grand of it, and then I only have about that much left.
Yeah. But we definitely we both have degrees. Now, the question comes to how useful we felt the education itself was. For me, I want to say, out of all of the stuff that I had for classes, obviously with how bad I am with grammar and English, obviously I didn't do well in any of those classes. But the one things that I would say were super positive from WGU is the CCNA. It kind of has a bad rap from like security perspective, because it's not totally there, and also the CCNA security itself is basically a, hey, can you can you work through the OS and build up a secure, was it one of the IPSs or something? But when I got that, the one thing that I will say is the knowledge you get from actually setting up the routers and knowledge of figuring out where to apply certain things, how to set up the zones, setting up the VLANs, all of that stuff, it actually does translate pretty well, especially when you start finding out how similar a lot of the tools are, such as like other IPS tooling or appliances, and how they use very similar structures. Now, I have never so far in the career encountered any Cisco devices or any of the devices at all that I built out or tested on in any of the things that I took from WGU. However, the knowledge and education is not about saying, here, this is what you're going to learn, and this is exactly what you're going to deal with when you get into your career. It's about understanding that it's all syntax, and being able to apply it to other things is how you will start getting the most out of it. So as I said, the CCNA security, I haven't messed with any Cisco related devices, but being able to take that and apply it to utilizing Palo Alto devices or Juniper devices, it felt extremely similar. So I felt that was a really good investment. The Security Plus was part of it, and I do feel there's some really, really good things in the Security Plus which don't necessarily get they don't get worked. A lot of people spend a week with like Professor Messer videos and then go and take the test and be like, oh, I passed it, I did good. But if you aren't also doing any kind of lab work, if you're not putting your hands on understanding some group policies and being able to build some of that stuff out, or being able to see, like, spin up your own domain controller, it's something that you can do. It's not difficult. DigitalOcean, I'm sure, has plenty of tutorials of doing that, but without that knowledge, you won't. It'll be hard. It just gets harder and harder to justify why you have some of those. But going back to education, the AA degree that I got, funny enough, I think the one class that I enjoyed the most, that I felt like I got the most out of was a psychology course. And you start understanding human behaviors, and also sociology courses. It's weird how those two things can actually benefit security people.
I mean, it makes sense. At the end of the day, people doing behind all of these things, you are dealing with people. So that's kind of where it all starts. So it's when you think about it that way, it's not that weird. But yeah, maybe looking at it at a surface level, it's not a direct like one-to-one correlation. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, knowing how people think is, to a large degree, is to me something that helps a lot with things like interviews, for example, and figuring out whether somebody is a right fit for your team or not. That's, to me, that's, for example, a lot more valuable than just your pure rote ability to memorize things or something. So knowing things like that and how people think, how they behave, etc., it's absolutely valuable and very applicable.
Yeah. Well, I know you went to ITT, so do you want to kind of talk a little bit about what you learned from there and give some perspective on that, and also your master's?
Yeah. I got my AA and then my bachelor's from ITT Tech in Phoenix, Arizona as well, and then I got my master's from Capella University. So The 2-year degree was in networking, 4-year degree was in security, and then my master's was also in security. So, yeah, right off the bat, I know a bunch of you are probably rolling your eyes when you hear ITT Tech. Fair enough. They don't have a great reputation. However, personally, at least at the time when I went, I actually felt really lucky to, at least at that particular campus and with the people I worked, because one thing I really liked about ITT specifically, and specifically my experience there, is that every single person that I had classes with was somebody still currently working in the industry, either as a consultant or as, directly in a high-level technical role. So all the things that they were bringing into their classes was very applicable to what they were doing and to the real world. It wasn't just theoretical knowledge, which is one of the issues with a lot of degrees, is it's people teaching it who have not been doing that type of work for, in some cases, years or decades. And in my case, for example, funny, you mentioned things like, domain controllers. Like that was literally one of the labs we have to do, is basically install server, promote it to a domain controller, configure DNS, configure things like zone transfers and print servers and all of those things to essentially simulate an actual network, and then do things exactly like you mentioned before, is configure switching, routing, VLANs, make sure it all worked, and all of those types of things. Like in my Linux class, we basically had to recompile the kernel. Like, how many traditional, schools do those types of labs?
Well, I know one university that does a lot of stuff about the kernel, and that's probably the Kentucky Fried College.
The KFU. The lesser known. That's our first. Do I call it a pun? I think it counts. Let's just start a pun counter.
Yeah. Well, we'll get one. We'll have it ding.
Ding. Well. Yeah, like the chicken being done out of the fryer ding.
Right. This is straight grease right to your heart type of ding.
Oh yeah, but yeah, I mean, to me, that's the thing I appreciated. Like, I actually had some of my instructors were people directly teaching Sans courses at the time, so a lot of the things I was getting was directly from that, and from that perspective, I really, like I said, I felt really lucky. I felt I learned a lot because I didn't feel I had that disconnect of, oh God, this is just theory, none of this matters, because all the labs and everything were very relevant. So I actually really enjoyed my experience, and I know that wasn't the case with every campus, with every, depending on what year you went, but I just felt like the timing in my case worked out really, really, really well, and actually I still follow a lot of those people who are still in the industry. So for me, that was a really good experience, but for the master side of things, that was a lot more traditional kind of the types of classes that you mentioned as well, Jason. It was things like classes like project management, which I will say right off the bat, like, I would never want to be a project manager. That is not something for me at all. Like, I do not have that level of patience. But taking that class was also really useful, is just to understand how does project management work, what are the different aspects of it, what are the pitfalls, what are the different methodologies, and that definitely becomes useful. Like, even if I'm not a PM, you're very often part of a security project, and understanding how that works, all the pieces that are involved, what makes project management practices effective, what are the pitfalls to avoid, all of those things are extremely relevant.
So one of the things, I totally forgot about it until you just said it, but one of the certifications within the WGU space was the Project Plus from CompTIA. I remember seeing it and being like, no! Like, oh, I'm going to have to get a Project Plus. And yeah, just like what you're saying, I've found a ton of use out of just stuff that I've learned from there. Now, whether I've executed it properly, entirely different story. But it's funny, those little things where you would expect it. You'd expect it more to be something interesting for someone who wants to move towards management. But the fact of the matter is in most cases, and by most I mean probably more than 90%, when you start getting to the senior level / engineer level, being a project manager of whatever you're dealing with tends to just become part of your job. It sounds like it sounds crappy, but it just kind of becomes part of it.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you might not be the project manager necessarily, but you're going to be closely working with the project manager, so having that understanding really does tend to be valuable. So this is another one of those examples of things that maybe don't directly seem like they relate, but they very much do once you're out in the real world. And even, some other things that are a bit more high level, like one thing I did appreciate from my education is just the ability to do research. Like it teaches you how to research, how to verify your sources and things like that. And that's, that becomes very important from an analysis point of view, because knowing how to effectively look for something is a skill that I think you have to be successful in this industry. And part of that is knowing that, it's not just about Googling and finding the right article, but knowing how to vet that and understand, is this actually useful information? Is this actually factual information? Is this something I should be using, or is this just, because anybody can post anything on the internet? How do you evaluate the value of that? Right. Knowing that type of stuff tends to be, something that I use every day.
Yeah, it just made me think of trying to figure out how to get some of my Java programs to compile back during my AA, and I couldn't get any of them to work for one reason or another. I don't even remember why. And my teacher at one point was like, "Well, you tried," and then gave me an A in the class. It's like, I don't think this is what it's supposed to be, but sure, all right, I'll take the A.
Yeah. That's the one, I think that's the thing that gave me nightmares about getting into coding, is my Visual Basics class that I had, where it was like, you have to create you basically have to print something, but you also have to do the print preview part of it. Sure. And you're sitting there thinking, oh, that's easy. I coded the entire thing in about an hour, and then I spent about another 4 hours troubleshooting. Just the print preview aspect of it, because for whatever reason, it just was not working. And that made me go, this is what coding is like. I'm so happy I'm not an engineer. Yeah. I couldn't do this for 8 hours a day. This is just... No, my brain, by the end of that, I'm pretty sure there was smoke coming out of my ears.
I don't get how people get through it, but some folks just enjoy the pain.
Yep. It was definitely useful, but it was one of those things that's like, oh my god, so this is what this is like?
Yeah. I think we hit a lot of these. Actually, we talked a little bit about the technical side of it. I mean, it sounds like you have a solid positive experience from it, and there's a whole lot of folks who, as soon as ITT's issues started popping up, they were like, oh, I hated my school, and just jumped on that whole bandwagon. But I think there's different representations of what problems are in the grand scheme of things, right? Some folks will just take one small issue and claim the whole thing is bad, instead of saying okay, this one part of this specific situation is awful or terrible, but the stuff that I got out of it was useful and knowledgeable.
Right. Exactly. So, look, I'm not going to sit here defend their administration side of things. That's part of the reason I'm in as much debt as I am. That side of it was horrible, but purely judging the education I got out of it at the time, at least, like, I would not change that, because I don't think if I would have gone to something maybe like ASU or any of the other places in that Phoenix area, I don't think I would have gotten the same education, because I simply don't think they have the people who focus, on the practical knowledge. Because if you're a full-time professor, that is your job.
Right.
Like, you cannot do both. So you are kind of automatically going to be getting more heavily on the theory side of things, which is not as applicable. Like, I'm sorry to say that, but like, you can read as many books as possible and talk about it, but this industry moves so far forward and so fast. If you're somebody that has been out of this industry for a year, a large part of what you're teaching might become irrelevant.
Yeah, I mean, I know folks who have moved jobs, gone to a company that is in kind of that older state of mindset, and tried to get back into some of these other jobs who have just keep pushing forward and moving towards the future. And they're like, I don't remember how to do any of this stuff. What's going on here? Why are you telling me to do X, Y, and Z? And it's like, well, that's the nature of the beast here.
Yep. So basically, to kind of give a quick sum up here, is that's going to be your individual decision, and it's going to depend on a lot of factors. For one thing, how much money do you want to spend on that? Are you willing to give up those jobs that have a hard requirement? Also, if you're going to go into it, do your research and make sure the program is relevant. There is really good programs out there, like Sans University, for example, is obviously going to be really good when it comes to that because of who's running it. But, that they also tend to be pretty picky, for one thing.
Yeah.
So do your research if you're going to make that decision, because the one thing I'm thankful for every day is the fact that I'm in this industry. I'm in the industry where I can find the job, where I have a really decent salary, and I will pretty much always be able to find something. So that somewhat offsets the debt that I have, but a lot of people are not in that situation, So that has to be something to consider, obviously. So whether you're willing to take on that burden or not. But yeah, these are some of the things I would consider when looking at that. So, do your research and weigh the kind of pros and cons of what we talked about, and make that decision of whether that's something that you feel you should pursue or not.
Yeah, you can always try and find as you're talking to the colleges or any of the education platforms, ask them what their success rate is on career placement as well. That tends to be a good thing, because they might tell you, oh yeah, we have like a 90% career placement, but ask them what type of jobs they're helping people get placed into. Because I know some folks, I know some universities out there that have been putting people in things that either they're not ready for, or things that have nothing to do with what the people actually wanted, and they consider that a success because they put them in a job, which that's not real.
That's just padding the stats at that point, basically.
Right, and that from one side of it. Sure, you can see it as a positive aspect that they were able to help place someone. Do we know all of the different things here? Like, was the person just being extremely picky? Was it a problem with the way that they were interviewing? Was it a problem with... There's too many variables to count. However, the fact of the matter is if you're not asking the questions, they don't have to answer it. They don't have to provide those statistics.
Yeah, exactly. So, like anything, research and make sure you're making a good decision when it comes to that, whatever you decide to do, and set your expectations, accordingly. And if you decide to go to a heavily theory-focused program, be ready for the real world being fairly different and taking some time to kind of adapt to that. Or
try and adjust. I mean, that's the other thing is, if that's what all the education is going to be, try and some of the stuff that we mentioned before, try and find some folks that are interested in security, interested in networking, interested in forensics, and see if you can start building out either your own club or find other clubs that already exist that do this stuff regularly. As an example here, out here in Phoenix, there's tons of different groups. There's Heatsink Labs. We have the actual cyber warfare range. All these different little things that people just have started going to. And I've been incredibly, I would say impressed, but it's not like I matter. So I would say it's very exciting to see that there's all these different other aspects for people to learn that we didn't have. Like our version of getting together and doing things, I mean, in most cases would just turn out to be a Counter-Strike LAN party, but it was a lot more difficult back in the early 2000s to try and be like, oh, let's take something apart or figure out if we can build up a server and see what happens. And exactly. Later on, once we get into our 20s, it's like, okay, well, now I got to work full time all the time, and where's that extra time I need? Oh, well, I kind of want to sleep, but then I just got used to not sleeping, and I would not suggest following suit and being in a horrible pattern of health.
Yeah. Sleep is good. You should sleep.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So I think we'll wrap up the education section here, and we're going to take a short break, and then we'll get into the certificates conversation. So we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. So let's move on to our second major topic here, which is going to be talking about certifications. Obviously another big topic, ties directly to the education part of that as well. And we talked about some of the stuff here already, so we're not going to kind of retread the same thing. But yeah, a lot of certification stuff does tend to come down to that HR checkbox, unfortunately. But let's talk about let's talk about more broadly first, I guess, on our view on the value of certifications. So why don't you start, I guess, on how you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I hate certifications, but this is coming from a anxiety fueled human being bag of bones that panics when my fingers tingle for more than a second. And I'm like, oh God, I'm about to die. Like, no, you're not about to die, moron. You were sitting on your hand. So from that perspective, I remember going into my first certification test, and it was for a Microsoft 7 certification. And the guy who brought me into the room was like, okay, this is where you do it. How are you feeling? And I was like, if I have to throw up all over the place, where do I do that? And he thought I was joking. And I was like, no. I don't know what happens if I have to be sick. He's like, well, we can't have you go out the door. I'm like, well, then everybody in this room better be ready. And he didn't really know how to deal with that, but at the same time, like in my mind, I was freaking out. I was going insane. And that feeling never went away. Every single one I took, I ended up having to take, I think, about 7 different certifications throughout my time at WGU. So that was like 2 to 2.5 years where every like 2 months you went in and took another one, So that spanned from Security Plus to these weird little ones for JavaScript, for databases, Project Plus, the ICND 1 and 2, and then the CCNA Security. So you have this like laundry list of different certs. And again, the knowledge is great if you understand that it's syntax and that you're not taking it as one for one. But when you're just not good at that testing environment, there's a lot of people who make fun of that, of like, oh, that just means they didn't study. No, like I spent, so as an example, Security Plus, which a lot of people kind of joke around about it, of like, oh, this basic level cert. I spent 2 months literally taking every single potential practice exam that I could find, being able to get 100% on all of them, and I still went into that feeling like I wanted to just die and melt into this pool of goop before having to jump in and take the test. Well, lo and behold, when I took it, I actually got a perfect score on the darn thing, but it didn't stop it. Like, even though I knew, I was very, very confident in just how much I put as far as effort into it, didn't stop me from feeling extremely nervous, extremely sick, and almost devaluing the stuff that I learned, because from that perspective of it, you start doubting yourself. You've learned something 1,000 times, and maybe at 9999 you start asking yourself, what if? And then all of a sudden, the thing that you learned, you're like, I don't have any faith in myself anymore. What happens if it was B instead of C? What's going on? What happens if I happen to miss the next 4? Like, you start making up these stupid things in your head, and it feels like there's nothing you can do about it. And this is some of the stuff I talked about in my anxiety talk at CactusCon, was just it becomes a fight with yourself. There's nothing there stopping you. There's nothing there stopping you from getting to the goal line. You know you can get to the goal line, but you tell yourself, there's no way I'm getting to that goal line.
Yeah, anxiety is a thing. That's, So basically what I'm hearing is Jason wants more tests.
I am not one of those people that should be put in any situation that is like life or death. Because I would spend more time trying to make sure that I do the right thing than actually doing anything effective. So,
which is really funny because we both work in incident response, and I think I am infinitely more nervous during a test than I ever been during an incident.
Me too. We've literally been at hands and keyboard against people in nation states, and I just felt like, okay, this is happening in comparison to a piece of paper in front of me, or a 4-question multi-box answer that pops up and is like, is it A, B, C, or D? And I'm like, oh my god, just give me a gun right now. So I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like there's like a really interesting conversation to be had with a psychologist, like about like, why is that? Considering one of these is literally having a direct effect on my job and whether I have a job, and the other one is just a meaningless test that I can just pay for to take again.
I have theories. One of those is I feel like one you have a little bit more control over. Like, you can feel like you have control over, and that's why I have nightmares. I mean, I've told you before, just I am terrible with whenever I see zombie things, and if I see something with a zombie, I will always have a friggin' nightmare that night. And it always tends to be me in a situation where I don't have control over things. So I truly believe that a lot of my anxiety stems from the fact that if I don't feel like I have control of my environment, if I don't have control of a situation, then my whole body just tries to shut down, and that is its fight or flight mechanism. It just goes full on possum.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, that's actually one of the things I was thinking as well. It's like you do have at least some level of control during, things like an incident. And I think part of the thing that doesn't help either is a lot of these tests, unfortunately, are kind of written in a gotcha way, where it's like, well, it could be A or B, so you can eliminate like 2 of the answers, but then the 2 that are remaining are written in like a almost intentionally misleading way.
All right, yeah.
That kind of, that's getting into, I guess, one of my issues when it comes to a lot of these certifications is exactly that, is the fact that the questions are not testing any real knowledge. It's either like completely based on memorization, or it's literally trying to mislead you so you potentially miss even if you know the answer, because you start doubting yourself because of the way the questions are phrased. So I guess overall, at a high level, my general take is certifications have their uses, but to me the use of it is, aside from the HR checkbox, the use of it isn't whether I have the certification. It's not passing the test. For me, it's about the knowledge you gain from getting to that point of working through it. And to me, that's what I like about it, is that the fact that it's exposing me to things I didn't know. I'm getting to learn in a kind of a structured way on specific topics, and specifically, I guess, I'm speaking here, like, I enjoy the SANS training, because even if I don't take the test at the end of that, if I do, that's great, and it's something I can add to my resume. But even if I don't, I could spend up to several months learning a lot and a lot of useful information, and to me, that's the value I take out of it. So to me, that's kind of the mindset. I think that's the right mindset to have when approaching these types of things, is focus on the knowledge. Don't focus on just the end result, because if you're one of those people who crams for a test, goes in there and then passes it, and then never again look at any material from that certification, you're doing yourself a disservice, because what have you gotten out of that? So to me, that's really not a good way to approach it, and it's not going to benefit you, because eventually somebody is going to say, oh, okay, you have the certification, but they're actually going to have the knowledge and start asking you about it, and then you're going to basically sit there going, oh, well, I passed the test, but that was like a couple of years ago, so I forgot everything. And
it's frustrating, right? And that it's hard to fault anybody. I'd like to almost be able to say that I'd fault the people interviewing that person to be someone that is like, okay, well, let's see if you can flex your intellect by giving you questions about what I know is on there. And quite frankly, I know I've done that for things like the Security Plus before, and looking back on it, I don't necessarily think that's right. So some of that is just means of trying to account for that knowledge. But this is an entirely other conversation we can have, just about figuring out what type of people you want in your company.
Yeah. And we will have that conversation, but I mean, I don't even necessarily mean like, you ask those questions in an interview. But for example, if you're somebody who passed the GCIH and you were hired as an incident responder as a result, and then you have an incident and you don't understand essentially the different incident phases, like right. you don't understand the Pictorial, framework, for example, or the general phases of the incident and what's involved. At that point, yeah, if I was the person who hired you, I'd not be terribly happy. Sure. Partially the fault is on me, because I didn't test you enough in the right way to know that you have that knowledge before I hired you. But if I'm somebody just working off the assumption that, hey, you have the certificate, and assume that you have that knowledge as well, then yeah, you're kind of, there's a little bit of misrepresenting your skills. And that's why I'm saying is don't do that, especially for things like SANS courses. Like, that material is very expensive, but it's also really good information. Like, I will still go back to my GCIH and just go through my index and go through my notes and just reread through it, because it's good information, and a lot of it is relevant even years later, even after several updates for those courses, just because it's good knowledge, it's good things to know, it's good things to refer back to. And to me, that is the value I taken out of it, is learning from those people like Ed Scotus, who is an absolutely fantastic instructor. And he's somebody that, like, he did the entire GCIH course in a way that was extremely entertaining and extremely relatable, and he's somebody that, like, that's the thing I enjoy. The fact that I got the certification out of it was good, but I just really liked learning about this topic that I enjoy from somebody who really knows his stuff and has a good way to relate it to me. And that's the thing I value. So even if, when that certification expires or whatever, I still have that knowledge that came out of it. And to me, that's the way I look at it now as well. It's whether I take the cert or not, that's almost secondary. But if I'm learning, if I'm getting something out of it, that's really the focus. And that's, at least to me, what should be the focus.
This is a good segue to focus on SANS and to really start talking a little bit about it, because newer folks, as they come in, or even folks who've been in for a while, if they've had a change of jobs, or maybe they've gone to maybe the company that they're working for is now pushing them to take SANS courses, as an example. If this is your first one, strap in, because it's going to get kind of bumpy if you have no idea what you're doing. And I think as we say that, one of the things to focus on is like Alan over here has gotten a couple goodies from them. I haven't actually taken any of their courses personally, but I do know quite a few people, and it's probably good for us to at least provide some perspective of what are good habits to build at the very, very start. So instead of sitting here giving you poor information and just making stuff up, I'll let Alan talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So when it comes to SANS courses, I took the GSEC and the GNFA, which is the Network Forensics certification. And generally, if you're starting with SANS courses, the path that you're going to go down, I think, if you're really brand new, the GSEC, which is kind of their introductory class, is probably a good one. If you're in its incident response, like I mentioned, the GCIH is absolutely where you should start. Like, that course is fantastic, and it covers any and all aspects of incident handling and incident response, including the tooling, including, like I said, the different phases and what's expected, and real incidents and how they work. And it's a lot of stuff. Like, for those of you not familiar, SANS courses are not easy. They are a lot of work. If you're doing the on-demand courses, you're given 3 months. You're given a stack of books that is, it is a stack of books. Like, it is a lot of information. So one of the things to do is, having a proper way to study for that is very important, because it's a lot of information. Like, these tests are difficult enough that they're open book tests, so you are allowed to bring your books in with you. But you don't want to just do that and rely on that, because, like I said, there's a lot of information. Generally, what people tend to do is they build indexes, which is essentially like your own set of notes. In my case, you just build something out in Excel. So, for example, you'll have one sheet you'll have focused on tooling. So you will have things like the name of the tool, and then in the next column you'll have like a description of what the tool does, and then in the next column maybe some common switches and parameters, and then in the next column you'll have the pages that tool is found on in the different books. So that way, if you get that type of question, now you can say, okay, this question is about tool X. Okay, well, where is it in my index? What page is this on? And then you can find that answer more easily if you don't know it off the top of your head. And then you do the same thing for concepts. So you'll have things like a definition. You'll have the concept. You'll have the definition, the next column, and then you'll have what page is that found on. So, but these are the shorter, kind of more condensed versions. And the whole idea here is to give you one book, essentially, and your index will be a book. When I printed mine out, I think it was about 600 pages. So yeah, they're not small, even as an index, but it gives you a quick way to refer to information and where to find it, because flipping through 6 different books you're going to run out of time. Even though their time allotment is fairly generous, the tests can be pretty long. So yeah, doing that. And the other benefit of building an index is the fact that by typing that information in, you're kind of reinforcing it, because you're having to read it, you're having to write it down again, and probably reread it several times. So it's a way to reinforce the information as well. But yeah, that's kind of for the studying perspective for the test. That's kind of some of the stuff I would recommend. But specifically in terms of their value, honestly, when it comes to certifications, I have very few that I actually consider of very high value. Like, I think the Security Plus is good as an entry-level cert to have. And then, to me, the only other choice is SANS, really. There is other things you can get, obviously. I think CISSP, if you're getting into management, sure. But in terms of actual applicable knowledge, in terms of value that you get out of it, I really think SANS is hard to beat. And I had a couple of their instructors, like Rob Lee, John Strand, and Ed Scotus, who I already mentioned. And they were, like, I honestly just, about every one of those people, I can't say enough good things. Like, they are so good at what they do, and they're so good at knowing how to convey this extremely complicated information in a way that can make, it can make sense to almost anybody. So that's, to me, why I feel that despite their cost, I feel like they're worth the value, because of what you get out of it is really, really high quality. However, with that said, this is never something you're going to pay for out of pocket. This is something they're probably, your employer is going to need to pay for. And that's why we say ask what certifications they cover, and be specific for that specific reason. Like, is it Security Plus? Is it CISSP? Is it, something like SANS?
Yeah. I would say the other thing that is out there that I've heard a lot of good things about. I haven't been able to really dig into it too much, as the OSCP from Offensive Security.
Yep.
But I have actually heard a whole lot of good stuff there. When it comes to I would say non-certification-y things like hack the box, there's a lot of folks saying really, really good things about their experience with hack the box stuff. But if you are focusing on the pen testing side of stuff, OSCP is apparently super, super good. You get a lot of exposure to really, really good concepts, and to definitely go towards that, because I have heard a couple things about the G-Pen being more, a little bit more towards that professional scoped type of offensive security, whereas OSCP has been a little bit more towards that actual hands-on focused side of activity. But from CompTIA, and just going back and talking about CompTIA a little bit, I know a lot of people have taken the A+, Net+, and Linux Plus, and I would say out of all three of these, Linux Plus is probably super, super good to catch, just because of the limited amount of knowledge. And I mean, Linux admins by themselves, in comparison to normal administrators, they tend to get paid more, and it's usually just because the talent tends to not be there. Most folks move towards the Windows type of environment, or they'll get put in careers which are focused on Windows, so it's kind of limiting their exposure and capabilities, whereas you start putting yourself into the role of getting Linux experience and understanding the core of how Linux works and all of that stuff. It's great. Net Plus, obviously, but you will get a lot of overlap in the Sec Plus training. So that's one of the reasons why I would potentially say Linux Plus would be a good starter in comparison to doing Net Plus first, then Sec Plus. I would say Linux Plus and then Sec Plus would be kind of a good path on that front. I've only known 2 people get the CYSA, which is more of their cybersecurity associate, I think. But they didn't have any negative things to say. They said they felt like the test represented the information well, and most of those folks said that they were dealing with the material, I want to say, for like 1 or 2 months before taking it. So that seems like it might be something that people start jumping into, just because it's probably a lot more affordable than jumping into the IH or anything.
Sure.
And the Pentest Plus, which I didn't even know existed. So
Yep, that one's new to me. But yeah, definitely, to go back, to the CompTIA stuff. As an entry-level certificate, definitely their stuff is not bad. Security Plus, Linux Plus, just to reiterate to what Jason was saying, having a basic understanding of how to work in Linux and the Linux commands, I think it's really important. You even if you're not a Linux shop, being able to understand, where things live in Linux, for example, and some basic commands and how to navigate through Nix systems is very, very valuable. So do yourself a favor and don't just completely ignore that. And just as a last note on the OSCP, yeah, definitely that was another one I did want to mention. I just didn't because it was focused a bit more on the red team side. But yeah, the reason that one is as valuable is, like you said, is because of the hands-on component. It is a very, very intensive lab component that, from what I've heard from pretty much anybody that takes it, is quite difficult, but as a result is also very valuable as hands-on experience.
I think the only one we didn't really jump into and focus on is the CEH. CEH we've heard quite a bit from. I mean, there's a lot of folks who tend to get it, the Certified Ethical Hacker. EC Council has been in some hot water lately. It's been identified that there's been a lot of plagiarism issues with, I guess, some of their articles that they've been writing up. I think the lady's name was Alyssa Miller, who ended up finding out that basically the entire word count was the same, and just how it was written and everything like that. So there was just plagiarism stuff happening, and there's a lot of folks who said that I don't consider my CEH mean anything now because of this plagiarism act, and it's like, well, I don't know if anyone really cared much about the CEH.
Yeah.
too much, but it definitely has its place. It had its place. I don't know if it's going to live through what has just recently happened, but it was still, I'm sure there was still good information in there. I just don't have any personal experience.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, everything I heard about the CEH has been, it's one of those tests you just study for and pass and then you forget about. So my impression of it is generally not very positive, which is why I don't know, I wouldn't really be recommending it necessarily over some of the others we talked about.
All right. Well, as a wrap up for certifications themselves, we well, what's your overall opinion?
To me, the biggest takeaway I want people to have, again, is just to approach this with the right mindset. Don't treat certification as just an exam to pass and forget about. Like I said, focus on the knowledge, focus on the useful things you can take away from it going forward, and if it is something that is of high value, like make it a resource you can refer back to. To me, that is really like something that is the most important thing to take away, is just don't treat it as just something, once you have it, you're done with it and that's it, and you're going to cram for an exam and pass it and be done. Like, to me, that is just, you're really doing yourself a massive disservice if you approach it that way.
Yeah, and from the CompTIA side, I'll tell you that the thing that we talked about here with don't let this data be theoretical. Go in there and perform some of the stuff that you learn about. So in the Sec Plus, you'll learn about things like rogue wireless access points. Well, instead of just hearing about it and checking it off as one of these bad things that can happen, make one. Like, get a separate little wireless router. I'm sure there's plenty you can get off eBay. They're like $20 or whatever, and put it on the network. Set it up in bridged mode or something, or build out your own man-in-the-middle type of capability, and just see what that looks like. If the time is always permitting, but YouTube will most certainly have some tutorials on how to do that stuff and get you to understand that. I went nuts when I took my Security Plus, so that's the only reason I feel like I did okay in it. But everything that it talked about that I didn't have a lab for, I put extra time in from the perspective of like, oh, can I replicate this in some kind of lab and get a better understanding of what this attack might be? Or can I find a YouTube video about what this attack looks like? I mean, they have a whole, at least when I took it, I think there was a whole list of different DOS attacks. And so I just started YouTubing for what does this look like, someone performing that. And sure enough, there's plenty of YouTube videos of people doing that on their own infrastructure, so you can see exactly what it is, because anybody and everybody right now can talk about DDoS, and that's what they do, is everybody says everything is a DDoS, but they have no clue what an actual DDoS means, like what is happening. I mean, we hear people say, oh, this one IP address is attacking us. Oh, well, what is it? Oh, it's a DDoS. How is it a DDoS when it's only one person attacking one machine? What's distributed here? So like there's stuff within this that you'll start picking up and start understanding at a very fundamental level to be able to see like, oh, well, this is how this is happening. This is what these different attacks look like. And then you move from that to, I can actually perform these attacks in my own environment and see what it looks like. And then you move into the blue team side of things by saying, well, what does that actually look like within logs? How can I capture that data? How can I defend from that? And now, from your perspective, as a new potential employee, you're coming in and you're saying, from the start to finish, I know how this happens, when someone actually does something, what it's going to look like, and how to prevent it. And you now have the full entire scope there. Now, you can't do that for every single attack. That's insanity. But you will at least have that general knowledge of incident response. That's what it all translates out to, is, okay, this is how it started. I was able to prepare for it. I was able to contain it. I was able to eradicate it. Just these concepts can be shared across literally everything that you deal with. It's you being able to have that confidence to be able to translate it out, and at least that's what I feel.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a kind of a good takeaway for anything, though. Is like, for a lot of this stuff, make it more than just theory. If you have the means, if you have the time, if you have the resources, it'll help you understand it to a much more deeper level than just reading about it. Really is I think the succinct way to kind of say why you want to do that. So yeah, obviously different circumstances and timing allowing, but make as much effort as you are able to, basically, on that front.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So I think we'll consider those two topics very well covered. And if you guys want to hear any more about any of the particular things we talked about, either specific courses or specific experience with the education side, feel free to ask, and we can always revisit that. But for now, let's go ahead and move on to our community shout out. And yeah, leave that to you.
I'm so sad because this whole entire time I thought it was cyber cops, and it's just cyber ops. But anyway,
that would have been way cooler.
Yeah, if you don't know who Florian Roth is, go on there, follow him, read everything he's ever done, and you will learn a lot. I think that's really the best way to reference it. Oh, geez. I almost went this whole entire episode without saying John Strand or Ryan Chapman. So, John Strand, Ryan Chapman.
Hey, in my defense, I said John Strand.
Okay, all right. I didn't catch that. Sorry. Anyway, so Florian Roth has done some awesome stuff. He's built out the LOKI scanner. He's built out Sigma, which is a signature format for pretty much all the different SIMs out there, whether you've got Elasticsearch, whether you're using MDATP, Maybe you're just specifically focused on, I think it does things for snort signatures, Splunk, all these different possible IPS or SIEMs. I think they have signature format writers for all of that. But it's a universal format where you just plug in the information of what's bad and hit generate, and it will generate what that overall structure of that signature will look like. And then you just grab it, plug it in based off of, there's going to be things like field names maybe you have to account for. But for the most part, every person that I've heard that has utilized this in some way has very positive things to say. So definitely go with that. There's also yarGen, which is a Yara rule generator. It is so hard to say Yara without sounding like you've got some kind of mental problem. Like, Yara.
Or being like a pirate. Yar.
Okay, that makes it way better in my mind now. Okay. But the other thing that has just recently been created that he's been building out is APTSimulator. I would say just go on Google and look for APTSimulator, but when you do, you'll probably find 1,000. But go on Florian Ross' page, look for APTSimulator on his. They are focusing on Cobalt Strike and figuring out ways to build out better detection mechanisms for you to test your environment. So if you don't yet already have a overall process and procedure built around testing, start with something like this. It's going to be a great way of being able to also sell things to management, folks up above, by saying, like, look, we don't just build our signatures, we test them on maybe a monthly basis, and we utilize these different technologies to do so. And these technologies do things like pretend to be Cobalt Strike, or pretend to, just run Mimikatz and tries to export certificates, export usernames and passwords and whatever. And then you'll have a much better platform to be able to take to your higher ups, up to the CISO level or even further, to say, look, this is the reason why we feel you're protected and why we need to continue keeping our budget, because this is how we know what we're doing and why we're doing it well, instead of just coming back and saying, well, we've handled all our incidents for the month. Okay, great. I'm glad that you're able to get to your incidents within 1 minute, but why did this one thing that completely owned the whole entire network that you still got to within a minute happen in the first place? Oh, well, we missed a potential thing that could have been a signature, but we don't have any time to build those signatures. There you go. This kind of moves us into the next piece, which is our tool recommendations. And I'm going to go with CyLR, but Alan
I'm going to say CyLR.
Alan over here says CyLR. And it's a live response collection tool from Alan and Jason. You got to be kidding me. I did not mean for that to happen, but...
Whoa, did we make this tool and didn't realize it?
Well, these folks have way cooler last names than us. Yegi and Orlikowski.
Yeah. I was looking at that. I'm like, I'm going to butcher these names, so apologies to both of these folks.
Yeah. I know I've used this only a couple times. Alan's messed around with it quite a few times, and it's super cool. It will collect a whole bunch of your forensics artifacts. I know you can also tell it to upload to a directory if you have, FTP or SCP open?
I believe so. I'd have to confirm. I've never actually done that.
Done the uploading part, yeah.
Yeah, the uploading part.
Some of the other stuff we'll talk about later, like Velociraptor. There's a lot of things that kind of do some of these things, but are more host level, but if you need something that just goes on there, collects the data that matters, and pull it right back off, we'll be talking about a few of them. But CyLR is definitely a good one to take a gander at, for sure.
Yeah, and one of the things I liked about it is, one, it's very comprehensive, and two, it is extremely fast. Like, this can finish, in a matter of a couple of minutes. There's a bit of a caveat. If you're collecting the USN journal, that's going to take a little bit longer, but you do have the option to exclude that, and if you do, it's like a minute and a half, and it'll basically dump everything out in a directory in its own file to make analysis much, much easier. And it's... yeah, I highly recommend that if you're kind of having to just collect something off a host directly, and you want to do that in a very, very kind of efficient way. Like I said, I've used it a couple of times, and it's been a really kind of positive experience, at least when I've used it, and fairly straightforward. Not really had any major issues with it, aside from, like I said, it can take a little bit longer to run if you're including the USN journal entries, but that's about it. So definitely check it out.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, we're gonna go ahead and get to the wrap up here. Finish this off with some of our links, and that is the twitter.com/MalWerewolf. I will try not to say MalWerewolf.com in any of these. Oh no, one of them I have to. So youtube.com/MalWerewolf, MalWerewolf.com, and then of course Anchor, anchor.fm/MalWerewolf. You can hop on there, do some listener support, throw us some money. Some of you whole 10 listeners that are out there on the planet, give us all your money. No, it just helps us with maintaining the site, really, and eventually what we'd like to do is basically build a means to be able to help fund people getting things like security pluses, different certifications, and that's where a portion of the money will go once we actually start getting some support and everything. But we are honestly doing a lot of this mostly for fun and for helping spread the good word.
Yeah, exactly. So, even any sort of support is welcome. Obviously, just listening and telling folks about the podcast is great as well. Leaving us a rating, following, subscribing, etc. There's a million different ways to support whatever you feel comfortable with doing. We really appreciate it, and our goal really is just to bring some useful information to you folks, and hopefully build out a community and do some more cool stuff. And we have a lot of ideas, and we just kind of want a reason to keep doing it and keep developing and making this as useful as possible. So, with that said.
One of the last things here, because we almost went the whole entire time and I didn't, but and on AEW this week, a new person just premiered and surprised the world by showing up on AEW without their 90 days non-compete clause being up in WWE, just to find out that this fella had an older term contract that said he didn't have a 90 days. He had a 30-day non-compete clause. So it was one of the very rare times in wrestling where something was a shock when that person appeared. But, yeah, there you go.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. A fella named Aleister Black was in WWE for about 2 years, I want to say, a couple of years. And he was one of the people released last month, and everyone was expecting him to either sign back with WWE or go to AEW, but in most cases, people have like 90-day non-compete clauses, so they have to wait this really long time. So the fact that this guy just shows up out of nowhere within a month, we were like, what the heck is going on? Fake stuff that is exciting.
I guess this is this is Jason's way of saying if we get enough support, we'll have a spin-off wrestling podcast. So yeah,
I can do that. I can do that. But the problem is I'd still start talking about wrestling on this podcast. So.
Well, before we can get any further down that particular rabbit hole, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. So thank you, folks, for listening to us this week, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks with another episode of the WolfCast.